Welcome to Chinwag Tuesdays, your passport to a world of language and culture.
Hi everyone, welcome to Chinwag Tuesdays. Today is the start of season 3. And if you have forgotten who I am, I'm Amanda, and today's special guest is Chris. He is from Australia. He's the founder of Crouching Tiger Network, and he helps support professionals to practice handling tricky work situations. Thank you so much for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks for having me on your program.
Thank you so much. Now, could you please introduce yourself? I didn't want to give too much away in the introduction. So a bit about where in Australia you're from, what you do now, and a bit about your time living overseas.
Sure. I am currently based in Melbourne, and this is the place I was born. So I was born in Melbourne. My parents were born in Malaysia, and my ancestors come from China. As a sort of random fact maybe to share is I'm actually part of the 76th generation of Confucius. So my surname is
Wow.
Kong, Kong. So that comes from Kongzi, which is Confucius's name. Yeah, so my great grandfather, 76 generations back, was Confucius. Yeah. But I was born in Melbourne. Yeah, it is incredible. Most or all of the wisdom has been filtered out and disappeared by now, but that's something I cling on to. I was born and grew up in Australia. I studied finance and law at university. But as you mentioned, most of my career I've actually been based overseas, so based in Asia. So I was based in Asia for 17 years, for 3 years in Singapore, and for 14 years in China. So I was working in these countries, and most of my work was related to data transformation in the consumer goods sector. So helping, I would say, relatively traditional companies, like food companies, to use data to help their businesses. Yeah. I returned to Australia 4 years ago, and since then I started Crouching Tiger Network, CTS. Our mission is to help quiet achievers to build networks and to build soft skills. And I'm thrilled doing this work because a lot of people that we support tend to focus on working hard as opposed to developing their soft skills or improving their visibility. So I'm really thrilled to be doing this work.
Yeah, that's incredible. What a story. What a background. So I think you mentioned that you spent around 17 years working abroad. Is that still accurate? 17?
That's right. Yeah, 17 years.
Yeah, wow. Incredible. I'm in India. It just hit 6.5 years, so I can't even imagine
Oh,
17 years. What a feat.
great. About to hit your 7-year itch, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So tell me a bit more about how working abroad kind of changed the way you communicate and build relationships at work.
So people in China speak Mandarin. So my parents don't speak Mandarin, similar to sort of anyone else. I had to kind of pick up the language myself. So as it relates to communication, I think one thing I did learn was that the focus of communication isn't about being right, but it's about being understood and understanding other people. So
Yeah.
interestingly, even though the colleagues that I worked with were predominantly Chinese people, so people who had a different first language, interestingly, our communication was quite smooth. And I think one of the reasons for that is because both of us used language where we tried to communicate in a very simple way to be understood to each other. So I think that
Yeah.
was one learning that I had around communication, that simple communication can actually make communication more smooth versus more complex and complicated language. And as it relates to relationships, one thing that I did pick up was that relationships and building trust needs to be intentional. So by focusing on adding value to other people, we can develop trust. And when we develop trust, we really find close ways to connect and help each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said about simple kind of communication being the kind of best way to communicate is spot on. And I think that from my experience, that's kind of a misconception that a lot of migrants have when they go to Australia is that they need to be having this advanced vocabulary. The amount of students that I get come to me saying, I'm having trouble communicating, I want to improve my vocabulary. I'm like, it's not always a vocabulary issue. Simple vocabulary generally works best. So yeah, it sounds like that's something that you've also figured out along the way.
Definitely. And you actually remind me of one. I remember my first project meeting in China. We were sitting in a room and I was the leader of this project. I was sharing a work plan and I was asking if anyone had any questions or comments. And then there was silence. And I thought, oh, this is super. Everyone's on
Yeah.
board. How good am I doing? And then at the end of
Yeah.
the meeting, it was chaos. Everyone went off in different directions, doing things completely the opposite to what I thought we'd agreed. And
Yeah.
so the lesson I learned from this experience was firstly that silence didn't mean agreement. And I think the second
True.
lesson I learned was the importance of reaching out to people one-on-one as opposed to in a group setting. I think particularly in many Asian workplaces, contexts, yeah, but I think even more generally, I think the one-on-one interaction is the one in which people can feel a bit more comfortable to share how they really feel, as opposed to
Yeah.
in a group setting, where in a China context, it was a lot around saving face and actually not wanting
Yeah.
to put me in a difficult situation by pointing out things that I may or may not have done that were actually holding things up.
Yeah, that is so true. I recently read a book, but basically it was about cultural communication and cultural fluency. And this is actually that something that they talk about, which is similar across a lot of Asia, and it's similar here in India too, where yes, if you ask someone, are there any questions, a lot of people, they're not really going to say them out loud because of what you said, to save face. They don't want to embarrass you, thinking that they're picking you out or picking on things publicly. Yeah, so yeah, very interesting.
Great.
Yeah. And so from your experience, what would you say are the most common mistakes migrants make in either awkward or even high stakes workplace situations?
That's a really great question. I think two things come to my mind. There are many different challenges that people face, but I think there are two common sets of mistakes or challenges that people, particularly from a migrant background, face. I think one relates to a mindset of avoiding difficult conversations or difficult situations. Yeah. And I think a second relates to focusing on doing the work as opposed to building visibility. Yeah. So I might zoom into these one by one. So for the first one around avoiding difficult conversations, this is really normal. So a lot of everyone really doesn't like conflict. So I don't really know many people who actually, seek conflict or thrive in that. So I think the common feeling is that most people don't really like conflict. However, I think migrants over-index in wanting to avoid conflict or wanting to avoid difficult conversations. So this is actually not really even about communication or about interacting with other people. This is in our own mind. How can we approach situations as opportunities to influence them rather than as something really scary that we should avoid? Yeah. So that's the first one. And the second one relates to the fact that many migrants really have a great work ethic, which is wonderful, but really tend to focus on putting all efforts in doing the job well, in completing tasks, as opposed to building visibility. And when I say building visibility, that could be visibility in one's workplace. So visibility with various stakeholders in an organization you're working for, or it could be more general in building visibility outside of your workplace within your industry more broadly. Yeah. And so these are generalizing, but I think they hold true. But these are not really
Yeah.
character flaws, but they are
Yeah.
some patterns that I have observed.
Yeah, that's very, very accurate. The building visibility one is a really good point to highlight. I think, like you said, with migrants, they do have a very good work ethic, especially if they come from a country where work ethic is valued more over relationships in a way. But that just doesn't quite fit into the Australian workplace culture, does it? There needs to be that kind of blend of being a hard worker and being conscientious with your work, but also fitting into the company culture or the workplace culture. And that might mean engaging in small talk and having those sort of conversations and networking and everything like that. And I think that's where a lot of migrants do tend to struggle.
Very well said, Amanda.
Thank you. Which kind of leads straight into the next question. Why do things like networking, speaking up in meetings, or even handling feedback feel so hard for migrants in Australia? So what do people often misunderstand about these situations?
think there are a few points I want to share here. I think one of them is that many people from a migrant background were actually rewarded for being diligent. And so that work ethic that we were talking about, yeah, really is something that's been encouraged typically in the past experiences they've had, either in schooling and their education system or perhaps in some work experiences. And so being visible was not only encouraged, but in many cultural workplaces was actually discouraged. We want to keep a low profile rather than sticking our head up. So I think that's one contextual background, that being diligent and focusing on doing the work rather than on networking or speaking up, something that was encouraged. Yeah. So that's the first point. I think the second point I want to share is that doing these things feels hard because we haven't been taught how to deal with these situations. Yeah. So in school, in university, most of the subjects that we're taught actually relate to technical topics. Yeah. So if you're studying engineering, you're typically learning about the technical aspects of engineering. If you're learning IT, you typically talk about programming, as opposed to the soft skills, or as opposed to the people skills of networking, of speaking up, of handling feedback. Yeah. So I think those two reasons combine to make it pretty easy to understand why it can be a bit difficult to deal with these situations, because people were rewarded for not embracing these topics and were not taught on these topics. But the good news is that people can get better at these areas through practice. Yeah. So it's not like we're born with being able to be a good networker, or we're born in a way our natural skill is to speak up in meetings. No, actually, all of these areas are skills. They're not personality traits. And so there are things that
Yeah.
people can always pick up.
Yeah. Yes. So true. I think people can be very technically smart. They can be very technically skilled. Those are things that, like you said, they've been taught how to study, how to do those things, but that's still a skill. So if you can become technically smart at something, you can improve your communication skills and you can be a good communicator. It's just trying to then put the effort into learning those skills.
100%. And that's why I admire the work that you're doing, Amanda, with Aussie English, because I think,
Thank you.
language mastery, when a language is not your first language, is not easy, but finding ways to develop that as a skill is so important.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think there is a bit of a misconception. I mean, I do teach pronunciation. I do help people improve their pronunciation and also improve their accent if they want to have that more Australian or natural sounding accent in Australia. And I think there is a misconception that you have to speak with an Australian accent to fit in or to be understood. No, you don't. There are ways that you can improve your presence, your pronunciation, your general speaking in order to be understood. It doesn't mean you have to change your accent if you don't want to. Of course, some people do, and I will help them with that. But again, yeah, pronunciation, it's just another skill to improve, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah. Would you say that, so the things that you help migrants with or professionals with, did you have the opposite struggle in China? Did you find that maybe you were too, what's the word? Maybe, I don't want to say too loud, but maybe your presence was too much because you come from a country where, you are very bold, you are louder. Does that make sense? I feel like that here in India sometimes, that I'm a bit too much.
Yeah. In some ways, yes. That's an excellent point to understand the lay of the land that you're in. I mean, a China workplace, if I make some generalizations, respecting hierarchy and kind of not speaking up unless you've been asked something tend to be cultural norms. So I think that is a really interesting point. But I think one of the things actually that came to my mind after I moved back to Australia is that I see many of these kind of cultural courses or helping people to prepare on doing business in China or these sorts of things. And they focus a lot on kind of areas of etiquette, give your business card in a certain way or sit in a certain seat at a dinner table. On the one hand, I think they're important, but on the other hand, I actually think being genuine in wanting to engage with people and help people and show a curiosity for someone else's language or someone else's culture. Based on my years in other countries, I believe that actually carries more weight than memorizing specific sort of areas of etiquette. Yeah. So as an example, working out where to sit at a specific dinner table, I think, in my view, is important, but I would say less important than having a drink with someone or asking someone a question to learn about them. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that point landed or not, but I think to your earlier
Yeah.
original question, yeah, there were areas of cultural difference that I felt in moving to other countries that I needed to adapt to. And then my original cultural background or cultural habits, I think I needed to work out in what ways that they could be complementary and helpful, and in what ways I sort of needed to avoid them. Yeah, that was probably more a bit of
Yeah.
on a case by case basis.
Yeah. Yeah, true. There's one thing that happened when I first moved here. You know, in Australia, when you're driving, if someone lets you go or they give way, you give them a little thank you, a little thank you with the wave on the steering wheel, right? So I remember once I was driving out of our society, our complex, and we have physical security guards. It's not like a security system that opens up the boom gate. And I was waving thank you. I was waving thank you to the security guards. And one day my husband was with me. So my husband's Indian. That's why I live here. And he looked at me and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm waving thank you." He's like, "Don't do that." People don't do that here. Yeah. And it was like little things like that. And I found that in Australia, I was a very talkative, outgoing person in different situations. And it's something I really had to learn to maybe tone down in some cases here because it was a little bit too much. So yeah, those cultural nuances and understanding those and trying to, like you said, case by case, figure out if it was complementary to the situation or maybe something that you had to rein in.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that one. You actually remind me of another common practice in China, just on the road. So in Australia, people would typically horn their car when they're a bit angry, right? I've been cut
Yeah.
off, horn, yeah. Whereas
What do
in
you mean?
China, yeah, what are you doing? And whereas in China, actually, the horn was typically used in a different way, just more to let someone know I'm here. So if someone's coming in, it'd be more boop, boop, beep, 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 just to let you know, hey, I'm here, just be careful, as opposed to
Yeah.
hey, what are you doing? Get out of my way. So it's interesting how
Yeah.
a similar kind of action can have different meanings in different places.
Yes, it's this exact same here in India. If you're overtaking someone, you beep the horn. If you are reversing, you beep the horn to let them know you're coming. If you want someone to move out of the way, you beep the horn. Oh my goodness. The first time I got in the car after living in India 3.5 years, I went back to Australia for a holiday. I actually didn't really like driving, and I still don't in Australia because I'm so used to the rules and how people drive in India. I'm scared I'm going to do something illegal in Australia and get like a really big fine. But I remember the one time I did get in the car, it was in my hometown because I was comfortable there. It was just nothing had changed. I was reversing out of my dad's place and there was a guy on a bike, like a bicycle going past, and I almost beeped the horn to let him know I was reversing. And I've gone, oh my God. It's so funny how those things that used to be a bit strange in the beginning
Yeah.
become such a habit that it's then strange in your home country.
Reverse culture shock. I think that's how some people call it.
Absolutely, yeah. Did you have much reverse culture shock when you moved back to Australia?
In some ways, I think many people talk about reverse culture shock being a bigger sort of impact than culture shock because culture shock typically is something that you sort of brace for. You're expecting to have some difference in culture, but perhaps returning to your original country might not. I mean, for me, the biggest shock, I think, was having my old friendship circle develop different lines. So most of my
Yes.
school friends kind of got married, had kids, and had young kids.
How dare they?
Whereas, yeah, but I hadn't, and that was probably one of the shocks that I guess in my mind I imagine that even when I return to Australia, I might have a similar friendship circle and we do things similarly to what we did before, but perhaps that might not have been realistic. And that's good because people, when they develop different lives, can and should have different communities that they spend time with. So we're all still really
Yeah.
great friends, but perhaps the
Yeah.
day-to-day nature of that might have evolved.
Yes. I remember my first trip back to Australia after 3.5 years, and I think I had a meltdown after the fourth or fifth day. And I
Mm.
couldn't really explain why. I don't know why. I was so excited to go back home because this was actually after COVID as well. So I was really excited to get back home, but literally everything about my pre-India life had changed. Like there was not one thing that was the same. During that time, my parents separated, they got divorced. My mum moved to Brisbane. My brother and his wife had bought a house. My sister had a baby and she was pregnant again. My gran had moved into a nursing home and my dad was living in her house. Like everything had changed. So I went back to Brisbane, and for the first time, I wasn't staying in my apartment that I lived in the whole time in Brisbane. I was staying with my mum in a house that I had no emotional connection to. When we did go to visit my brother, it was in a house I had never been in before. All these things, it was so difficult. And what you said about people having their own lives, that is not something I was prepared for. Of course, people are going to change, so they should. I also changed, but I was not prepared for it, and no one had told me about this kind of struggle with returning back.
Mhm. Yeah, it's real.
It absolutely is, yeah. I think the reverse culture shock is a lot harder than the original culture shock. And then I don't know if this happened to you going between countries, but I don't even know how else to describe it. But I went back to Australia. I was in Australia for 5 weeks, came back to India, and I felt like I went through culture shock a little bit again. I had to readjust to these Indian habits and routines. And it was almost like it was a reverse culture shock.
So, I mean, some habits can develop so quickly. I want to I want to
Yeah.
share one with you. Yeah, maybe you could help me even shed light on it. Because on one business trip I had to Mumbai, I was there for, it wasn't that long, it was less than a week. And we were mainly in workshops. And a lot of my Indian colleagues tended to have this little sort of sway of their neck when they agreed with something. And then by the end of the week, for some reason, someone asked me a question about something and I wanted to kind of indicate, yeah, I mean, it might have been something like, are you happy with this food for lunch? And I wanted to say, yeah. And then suddenly my head went in a certain way and I was like, whoa, I hadn't even been in India for a week and I started to mimic some of the gestures. Yeah.
Yes, it absolutely does happen. My vocabulary has started to change naturally being here 6.5 years. Oh my gosh, I hate some of it though. I call tomato sauce ketchup. I call
Oh,
chips
wow.
fries. I know,
Oh my,
yeah.
Amanda, blasphemy. Okay. Yeah.
I was back home for Christmas and I was telling a story and I said XYZ. No, XYZ. I said XYZ and everyone looked at me. Z. I said, oh my gosh, XYZ, sorry. Yeah. So it does happen. Yeah. So I definitely do the head wobble, so they call it. But yeah, interesting that you picked it up and you weren't even in India for less than a week.
Yeah, I was shocked as well.
Yeah. So you have said that every role you've landed in the past has come through networking, which is really, really cool. And I think it's something a lot of migrants struggle with in Australia. So what does good networking really look like? And what is the biggest myth migrants believe about it?
Yeah. I could talk all day on this, but I'll try to keep it succinct. So I might start with common myths. So there are many
Okay.
myths that I've learned of people that I'm supporting. So one myth is that networking is for extroverts. Yeah. That you need to be extroverted to be a good
Yeah.
networker. The reality is that anyone can be a good networker. And if anything, introverts make better networkers. And the reason for that is one of the key qualities of networking is being a good listener. And so introverts tend to be good at listening and understanding other people. Yeah. So I think that's one myth. Yeah. That you need to be an extrovert.
Yeah.
Whereas the opposite is true. Another myth is that networking equals a networking event. So an event with strangers standing around, awkward conversations. Yeah. So that could be one part of networking, but I would say lower hanging fruit in developing your network is not necessarily in a room full of strangers, but having warm referrals from people that you know. So being introduced to people being introduced to someone else in your friend's network, as an example. Yeah, this can
Yeah.
be an easier way or a more natural way to
Yeah.
connect with people. Yeah.
Yeah.
A third myth that comes to my mind is that networking is transactional. Networking is about asking people for favors. Yeah. So I think that is a myth, because the
Yeah.
true essence of networking and why I really believe in it, it's around giving first. Yeah. So there are a few things worse than someone you know who only contacts you when they need help, right? Only contacts you once every 6 months, and each time it's, oh, by the way, can you help me to do this? So no one really likes to you feel a bit
Yeah,
used,
true.
right? The only
Yeah.
reason this person contacts me is when they need something. And so if you don't like receiving that, then you probably shouldn't be doing that. So I think the better approach is actually to listen to other people, listen to what's important to them, and find ways to give value to them and to help them. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
this can make the whole networking feel less transactional and less about using other people, but more about giving value to other people, which is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the final myth I want to share is that networking only matters when you're looking for a job. In many ways, that's probably a bit late, right? So for me, in
Yeah.
my life, I have never successfully applied for a job. So all of the roles that I've had have been through being introduced to people or referred for opportunities. And the reason, and I feel so lucky that I've had other people look out for me for roles. And I feel really lucky. But that is not, one part of it is luck. But another part of
Yeah.
it is that I've had a network of people looking out for me for opportunities, because I
Yeah.
have taken efforts over a number of years in trying to give value to them and help them. So I think
Yeah.
if you're only looking to expand your network when you're looking for a job, that makes things a bit transactional, right? Whereas if you, over the course of your career or over the course of your life, proactively seek to help the people around you, then a natural human reaction is to want to help you back. Yeah. So I think those are
Yeah.
probably the biggest myths that come to my mind
Yeah.
around what some people believe networking is.
Yes, that's so true, because even for me in my mind, networking, I think networking event. So you have busted that myth for me. In my defense, though, I never actually I never really attended any networking events in Australia in my previous jobs. Yeah. So I went to my very first networking event. Well, actually, it was a conference in November last year. It was an educational conference in Delhi, one of India's biggest conferences, education conferences. And yeah, I did some networking there, and I met some really great people from Austrade, South Asia, which was really cool, and connected with a lot of really, really great people. But I was so nervous, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is what my students go through. This is what migrants go through in Australia when they're connecting and trying to, yeah, meet with people for the first time. But
Yeah.
I think just being myself, really, that was the main advice someone gave me: just be yourself. And I did. I just was myself, and it went so well.
Oh, awesome. Well done, you.
I
That
know,
is good.
yeah. I was shaking the whole time. I even spilled my coffee on me because I was shaking. Like, it was crazy.
And that does make it feel a whole lot easier when you don't need to pretend to be someone else, or you can just be yourself. I think if I can build on that, so
Yeah.
we've developed a simple framework that people can use in order to become better networkers. And it's based on 4 areas that we believe make someone good at networking. And
Yeah.
it's represented by the acronym SIGN. So
Okay.
SIGN. Yeah. So the S here stands for strategic. The I stands for ice breaking. The G stands for giving. And the N
Okay.
stands for nurturing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I briefly go one by one. So strategic is all around identifying what your goal is. Yeah. Because networking in itself isn't a goal. Like, that's not really, for most people, that's
Yeah.
not what the goal is. But your goal might be, for example, to find a job in a new industry, or your goal might be to be promoted, or it could be something else. But having clarity about what your goal is makes it
Yeah.
more helpful, makes your networking a bit more purposeful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Moving to ice breaking. So ice breaking is all around finding ways to expand your network. And so this is the best way to expand your network is through warm ways. So there are two ways to expand your network, in warm ways or in cold ways. So cold
Mm.
is something similar to a cold call, right? Reaching out to
Okay.
someone, they don't know you, you don't know them, and you connect. Or you don't connect because there's too much distance between you. Whereas
Mm.
warm ways are based on something you have in common. So the example we used before is a common person, someone both of introduces
Mm.
you. It could be a
Yeah.
common university that you attended. It could be a common hobby that
Yeah.
you have. It's something in common. Yeah. So that's the key theme around
Yeah.
ice breaking. Giving is all about giving value to other people. So the
Mm-hmm.
two key principles here are listen before speaking to understand what's important to someone else, and
Mm-hmm.
give before taking. Yeah. A tip that I have is within 24 hours of meeting someone, see if you can give them one small thing. It could be
Yeah.
offering to introduce them to someone. It could be an
Mm-hmm.
article that relates to something you talked about. You don't need to spend a long time
Nice.
to do anything, but
Yeah.
if you followed up with someone, nice to meet you, Amanda. Here's an article that related to, for example, reverse culture shock. It came up in our conversation and I thought you might find it useful. It takes 1 or 2 minutes,
Amazing.
but it
Yeah.
communicates that you're listening to someone else and you're resourceful. Yeah. And the N in the sign framework there is nurturing. So this is all around
Mm.
finding systematic ways of staying in touch with people so that you can
Yeah.
continue to give value to each other and achieve
Yeah.
win-win outcomes. It can be really
Yeah.
tough because everyone's so busy in today's society,
Yeah.
but creating a
Mm.
system to stay connected, ensures that you can
Yeah.
nurture relationships. So these
Yeah.
4 aspects, I would say, would be what good looks like as a networker.
Yeah.
And the great news is that each of these 4 can be brought to life by being true to who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. What a great framework. I've never really heard of anything like this before, but people love frameworks. They want simplicity. And if you can give it step by
Mm.
step, that's amazing.
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
I should actually mention that when I went to that conference, I did a bit of cold outreach the night before on LinkedIn. So I found this is probably what helped me the most, if I'm being completely honest, rather than just approaching someone there. So I saw on LinkedIn that the Australian delegation for Austrade at this conference. So I reached out to someone from the delegation and just did a bit of an introduction. Thanks for connecting. I'm Amanda. This is what I do. I live in India. I'll pop by tomorrow and I'll say g'day or namaste. And she had said, look, come and see me tomorrow and I'll introduce you to the rest of the delegation. And that's exactly what happened.
Awesome.
And so having that kind of connection before, it did make it a lot smoother. Otherwise, I think it would have been really hard for me to build up the confidence and just go and say, hey.
Awesome. Well done in being proactive in reaching out.
Thank you. Yes, I was really proud of myself. Just a completely new experience for me, but yeah, it was really cool.
Awesome.
Tricky workplace conversation. So if someone listening does have a tricky workplace conversation coming up, what is one simple thing they can do to handle it more confidently?
I'm going to over deliver and give you 2 things that person can do. But the first thing I would encourage them to do would be to pause. So if there's a difficult conversation coming up, I think the first thing you can do is to think about, what do you want the other person to feel or understand? Yeah. So put yourself in that person's shoes. Think about what's important to them. What are their challenges? And in the conversation, maybe think about what you're wanting them to feel or understand. So in other words, prepare for that conversation. Many people just wing it or just go into the conversation without preparation. But one thing I would encourage your audience to do would be to just pause and just spend a minute just thinking about that. Yeah. And the second thing I would recommend would be to practice the conversation. The difficult conversation. So for most people, the actual conversation is the first time that they are speaking any of those words. And so as with anything that you're doing for the first time, sometimes the first time you do things isn't the best. And so if you can find a person, a friend, a buddy to even just have a bit of a rehearsal of how that conversation could go, you can give them some brief, someone you trust, you can give them some brief context on what the situation is and have them behave in a certain way and you can practice out loud, that would be a great thing to do. Because by practicing,
Yeah.
you can make mistakes and
Yeah.
identify them before the real situation happens. So it could be
Yeah.
you're saying things in a certain way that makes someone uncomfortable. Okay, maybe I'll say that in a slightly different way. Yeah. So I did, yeah, find a friend, someone you trust who you can practice with. So we run boot camps where people can practice role play scenarios.
Oh,
So,
that's
and we've
great.
found that through practice, that is clearly the best way that you can get better at these conversations and go from avoiding them to actually proactively putting your best foot forward.
Yeah. Role playing is definitely, I think, an undervalued activity that people don't really think about, do they? Yeah. Yeah. And in a lot of situations, yeah, it can be great for anything. So having tough conversations, practicing your networking, practicing language skills, so
Yeah.
many ways you can use role play to improve.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. So, Chris, if people want to learn more about what you do and what CTN does, what is the best way to contact you?
Yeah, great. So I think the best way is probably through links. So you can find me, Christopher Kong, and Crouching Tiger Network on LinkedIn. I think there's probably one other, if it's helpful for your community, I think we can also share a free quiz that we have where people
Yeah,
can
cool.
actually, for example, related to the sign framework, where people
Yeah.
can get a bit of a scorecard of which areas are they strong in and which areas are they weak in.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
happy to
sure.
share that
Yeah.
with
I'll
you
pop it in the
if that's helpful.
description. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so great having a chat and learning all about what you do and how you help migrants, our kind of shared connection here.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, Amanda. I feel a lot of positive energy in chatting with you. Keep up the great work that
Thank
you're
you.
doing. Mm,
Thank you. You too. Thank you so
great.
much.
Thanks.